Good morning. So I wanted to talk to you about mind map using a software called SimpleMind, and specifically with reference to injury prevention using the functional movement systems and incorporating it with other non-functional movement systems, as well as research. And what I did was I took this software program and used it to collect my thoughts about how things fit together. And the skeleton guideline for my thoughts was Phil Plisky's excellent PDF document about systematic injury prevention for sports, military, occupational health and fitness. And for those of you who've not seen Phil's PDF, you can get that from his website, which is www.philplisky.com. That's Plisky, and then go to his section on injury prevention. You may need to log in. I think it's a free account to set it up. So in essence, what I looked at was to try to gather my thoughts around the functional movement screen and the Y balance test, both the lower quarter and the upper quarter, and to establish what research supported that and this, as well as injury history, what research supported the move to perform algorithms, and what research supported what happens when you intervene using these specific categories. So just press pause a moment whilst I sort this out. So and of course, whether there's any research to support the reliability of the SFMA assessment, which we now have, some recent poster presentations were delivered, as well as what other research might support the normalization of range of motion and strength as a way of modifying a risk factor for future injury. So this was and also we see in return to activity that hop testing as well. So I had a look at I critiqued these and tried to establish what we could reliably say about those hop tests. So if we go now to the mind map, I'm using this software called SimpleMind. Don't worry about that, it's written SimpleMind 2 here. That was just that I had downloaded it twice and it was the second version of it. So I have this sidebar over here which I'm just quickly going to reveal to you, because there is a functional movement systems mind map that I'm looking at here, but it does actually link a little bit later on to this separate mind map. So I'm just going to clear that out of the way, and I'll tell you when we do. Let's see if I can get that. Hide the I'm not sure how I can get rid of that. Anyway, let's look at this. So what I set up was a cell called functional movement systems, and I can zoom this in, and I appreciate that you're going to be looking for a bigger picture of it. Okay, so I could just use 2 fingers on the mouse trackpad on my Mac computer, and 2 fingers, and spread them apart just like I'm going to do now, or bring them closer together, and as I do so it shrinks in size if I bring them closer together. So to separate them apart makes it larger. So that's my central theme there. If I was to use this arrow here, what would happen is I've shrunk everything down, or collapsed everything down. You'll see that when I hover over it, there's a pop-up notepad. That notepad is in existence. You can see there's a little yellow dot there. If I click on that T for text, it brings up topic properties, and I've just taken some text from John Tureen of the Indianapolis Colts related to the systems and standard operating procedures. There were some cues for me that I felt were quite representative of what the systems approach of the FMS incorporates. So I could go ahead and edit that if I wished. This tab here allows me to lengthen that out if I prefer it to look like that. I'll leave that there for the moment. This tab here would allow me to attach, I could link to a topic or link to a document, and I do that throughout the whole mind map. I click on link to document, and then it asks me to select, and I could select the file straight out of my Finder. So I'll cancel that for the moment. There's other things that you can link to, such as an image, and you could also put a checkbox into this bubble, which would allow you to select it if you were doing activities that where you wanted to check things out. So I'm going to take that checkbox out again. So if I now expand out that bubble, the basic system that I used was that to honour the process that Phil Plisky wrote, I put each of his steps into to the bottom of functional movement systems. So the subtopic out of the systems was injury prevention in a systematic way, and each of these will spiral out to steps 1, 2, 3, 4. I didn't get to step 5 yet. That's a work in progress. So you'd see that step 1 was pre-activity baseline testing, and that was pre-activity baseline testing. Teasing out educational material followed by this process here. So let's go back to that. And step 2, just scrolling over, was an injury prevention plan. Then what happens when an injury occurs, what happens when you're determining safe return to activity. So I scrolled just to the top, and I will get down to these levels in a moment. These are some other concepts that I've read and studied through different workshops and books, etc. These are 5 mistakes that Jim Rayner at the Movement Restoration Project was talking about with people having issues around them, the application of the movement systems. And there may be times where I may want to refer to that, so I'm going to just drop that out for the moment. Phil Plisky also wrote some good blogs on his website about things that you should know about injury prevention with teams and large groups, and I could expand on that. I've got a suspicion. No, you'll notice that when I hover over this one, there isn't any text that shows up in a note format, and there is when I hover over this one, and you can see the difference is that yellow tab there. If I was to add text to this one, you'd see a little yellow circle in that right hand side. But I could still expand that even further, and you'll see that we get the 5 things that Phil talks about, and in each one of those there's a little bit of text where I've just cut and paste, and all copyright goes to Phil. I'm not publishing this, I'm just showing you about it, and I'm happy for him to give me a call and tell me to shut it down. But there's a link here. You'll see this globe, and if I was to click on this globe, what would happen is it would take me to more than likely take me to a PDF of an article written by that is about Mike Lair and his use of a system at a school. So I can just close that down now. But the reason that showed up was because this particular topic is about categorizing risk to maximize your resources, and Mike's body armor program is one program where he does actually categorize school students to make sure that they can maximize their resources in a school program. So occasionally I'll put an example in there. If I've read something very interesting and it relates to that topic specifically, I'll link it directly. You can only put one link in there, but you'll see later on that there are circumstances where I wanted to put a second and third link in. And the way to do that best is to just click on this thing here, and this creates a new bubble. So if I wanted to, let's say that Mike Lair had produced one program and it was released in a PDF format, and somebody else had produced a second program, so I could write in there Mike Lair's body armor program. Click enter. If I wanted to, I could make that a little bit longer. If I wanted to link Mike's PDF to that, I would go to link to document, and then I would click onto that, and I would go through to my Finder and find where that PDF was and then attach it. I could test it if I wanted to as well to make sure that that link does exist. And then I would put that alongside there. I like to line them up next to the parent topic. I am going to delete that because at the moment I've only got the one resource. But I would delete that particular link and I'd attach it to there. And if there was a second one, I would come back to here and add a second bubble and move that alongside. Let's say Mark Cheng, let's say he wrote one as well. Then I put one just like so. They would expand and collapse just like so. Because otherwise you end up with a massive mind map of lots of different bubbles. So when I want to collapse them down, I can. So I will just collapse that back out again. Now for some reason, let's just find out where that's gone. There we go. For some reason that wasn't attached. Yeah, there it is there. So I'm going to do that. Now I've made the parent bubble, that first one there. I'm just going to delete these because I don't want them there. So select the bubble, click on the delete X, and we're away. If I wanted to collapse that down again, I can. And I'll move across to 5 ways to get buy-in from parents, athletes and coaches. I think there's a link here to Phil Plisky's website that tells us that information. So let's have a look at that. There we go. So we're looking at, it's going to tell me that page is not found. So I could sort that link out a bit later on. It's quite possible that that page requires the login of the account. I'll fix that up later on. 2 basic principles. So in the movement book by Gray Cook, there's a few incidences where he's talking about principles of the functional movement systems, and in the early stages he mentions 5 principles, and then he summarizes those 5 into 2 basic statements, and those 2 basic statements are contained within this particular bubble. The 5 expanded early stage principles are contained in this bubble, and then later on he goes on to expand further and he comes up with 10. So what I did here was to write those 2 principles down, and then I wrote down the 5 principles that he further talked about, and I linked how they are together. So in essence, basic body weight movement patterns shouldn't provoke pain, and that is a standalone. Pain produced by movement should be reported. Okay, that's a basic principle. This is also a principle. We shouldn't have pain with basic movements. So these 4 statements here are kind of linked to that major one there, which says that we manage movement pattern limitations and asymmetries. Limitations, asymmetries, and that we do that before we apply a significant volume of fitness, performance and sports training. Fitness and performance and sports training meaning skill training. So we understand movement capability before we do performance-based capability, or before we do skill training. Okay, so that is collapsed into 2. So I'll collapse those down further, and then we have the 10 principles which go down to there like so. I again tried to link those 5 and how they fit into those 10. I'm sure this will adjust and I'll amend these, and they wouldn't matter if they were there. This is how I put that arrow and linked it across to there. So let me just delete that arrow for the moment. If I was to click on this plus button, I could get a bubble. I don't want a bubble, but what I can do is I can click and hold the plus button and drag it to there, and it will create a little link to me. So you'll see that that's now linked. Now I can change that if I decide that I don't want that to be linked there, and I think it suits best if it was linked down here. I click on that little grey section and just move it straight down. I'm going to click Command Z on my Mac, which undoes the last task that I did. So I'll collapse these down again because I don't want to get lost. So up the top section of our original topic are basic principles, mistakes to be aware of, and some things we should know. Down here we then look at the process that I tried to honour through what Phil presented. So if we started here, Well, let's say that I had collapsed that down. Right, movement systems, it represents a way for us to systematically injury prevent. That's not all it does. The movement systems also allow us to guide program design, to get a baseline of movement quality, and to understand our athletes and our clients better. Let's expand on that. Let's go to step 1, pre-activity baseline testing. If that had been collapsed, that's where I'd be, step 1. I can expand that now, and I could provide educational material. Now I do have some flyers. I can click on that and expand them out, and you'll see that I've got a football marketing flyer, a general explanation of what the functional movement screen is, also soccer marketing, and a general marketing flyer. I'll just flatten that out. Each one of those is linked to the actual PDF, so if I was to click onto that, it would go and open the PDF straight away. Okay, so I can collapse that back out again. If I didn't like that they were sitting there, I can move that somewhere else. Now, rather than move each one individually, what I could do is I'm going to click and hold on educational material. Now you'll notice that each of these will become highlighted a little bit thicker. The border will become thicker, which says that it's highlighted. Then I can just drag and it moves the entire thing. Now if I wanted to move all of those over to the left hand side but keep educational material, I would just do a single click and drag without a prolonged hold, and I'm back into that position there. I'm going to collapse that down. I didn't do this in one go. This took a couple of weeks to basically edit and move around, and after educational material I went on to what happens when we screen, and I lined that up directly with testing because there is a difference, and I wanted to highlight that there's a bit of a hierarchy here. There was a question that came out that said if you find pain in somebody before you get into screening and testing, you should do something else, and you don't always have to go on and do a screening, and there is examples why you could and examples why perhaps you shouldn't. And what I might do is I might send somebody straight along to the SFMA, and if I wanted to do that, I could click on this and then create. Let's just show you what I might do with that. So if you found pain before somebody had even got to screening, I might click on that plus button and create an arrow that says go straight to step 3. Alright, I'm going to just delete that for the moment because it just clutters it up even more than I want to just now. So I'm expanding it out a bit more. So we get to screening. We can see that we've got something that's going to drop out here, so let's have a look at that. That's the collapse and expand. The initial screening they want to do is less than body weight. So what happens at less than body weight? That means that we're not handling our own body weight, obviously. So if we look at, do we have any screening tests that are less than body weight? We do have some that are specific to the lower quarter. I've kind of put it into testing here, and perhaps that's not the right. Well, maybe it is. Testing is looking at ability. Screening is looking at risk. You could find ability problems that are still indications of risk, so we'll include that there. It's at this hierarchy. There are strength and flexibility problems that are risk factors for injury, and if I expand that out, you're going to see some things expand to the left. And any article that I've found that relates to range of motion or strength deficits or asymmetries as a risk factor for injury, I've included here. So we know that there's a hamstring and quadriceps ratio that's been indicated as a risk factor for injury, and if I expand on that, we go to the 2 papers that I've got so far that highlight on that, and I've put some text there and with the basic abstract, but if I wanted to go directly to the article, I'd click on that globe and it should open up the PubMed page where that reference is if I didn't have the original article myself. So let's go back to the SimpleMind there. I think the NAPIC article, it's possible I've got that, so let's see. No, it's going to go to the PubMed again. If I wanted to get hold of that article, I would then change the link and make it a PDF in my own Finder. Or if it was a Windows-based version, it would be in Windows Explorer. So these are the different ranges of motion or strength and flexibility problems that I might put in play if I wanted to know what I should be looking for And there are some sports where I would definitely pay more attention to some of these things. And there are some injuries where somebody's coming back from a lower limb and pelvis injury, and I would want to know that they had grossly normalised their hip abduction range of motion, because there's a paper out there that tells me that, and I don't think I've expanded on that abstract yet, but I'll get onto that. There's a paper there that tells me that reduced hip abduction range is a risk factor for lower extremity injuries. Similarly, the adduction and abduction strength ratios is a predictor for groin injuries. I think that was in ice hockey athletes. So depending on the type of athlete, whether they be soccer players or footballers or ice skaters, I may definitely want to ensure that their flexibility is symmetrical and that their strength is symmetrical. So let's go ahead and collapse that down. I could collapse each one, but I'll just leave that for the moment and just get rid of all of that. So there's also some less than body weight things that I could check for the upper quarter, and I might start with grip testing, and I would look at grip testing just with the hand by the side, with the hand out in front, whether that be like the midway of a military press or into full shoulder flexion, looking for the differences between the three as an indication as to whether somebody's getting full neuromuscular signals in different positions, which might point me towards having a closer look at the shoulder and the scapula and the neck, and how it influences grip strengths. So in the hierarchy of looking at baseline testing, I would then move on to body weight testing and screening. If you're thinking this is going to take you forever to do all of those things, you are right, and you'll notice that one of the things that we talk about up here with 5 things that you should know about injury prevention is that maybe we start with return to sport testing, because it takes the least amount of time and you can be very specific about your hierarchy. Starting small with a group and trying to get a category to ensure that you only go after those who are at most at risk, and use some reliable evidence-based predictive tests that can be completed quickly. So often when we talk about just using the FMS and the Y balance test, it's often because they are reliable, they are evidence-based, they can be completed quickly, and they will, as global movement pattern tests, will teach us where we should be looking further for risk factors like flexibility and strength that may be affecting an overall movement pattern. Questions about why we would use the FMS and why we would use the lower quarter Y balance test are answered in some text in here, and if we were doing body weight screening, we would then look at the functional movement screen. And these are the things that I've then collated about the FMS. We have a keynote address in PDF form. We have a whole bunch of data that looks at why it's the reliability of the functional movement screen, and you can see it's starting to get messy now. I haven't yet worked out a way to put these where they don't overlap, but I'm not bothered by it because I can directly link to that if I want to. If I find that it's getting in the way, I just collapse it and get it out of there. We know that it's predictive, we know that there's a link to obesity, we know that it's related to previous injury through some data that's done on soldiers in the United States, and we know that the movement screen baseline can be modified through rehabilitation/training. But also some data that says it's related to performance and it changes costs in workplace, etc., etc. So if I was to get rid of that because it's cluttering up some space, I would then move to dynamic balance of Y balance testing. And the reason that we use Y balance testing is because, whether it be the lower quarter or the upper quarter, is because we have data that says it's both reliable, it predicts future injury, it responds to training, etc., etc. And I could expand each one of these and take me to, it looks like we're going to clear that one away, and it would take me to the articles that highlight the statement that's been made. Okay, so let's clear that Y balance, collapse that down I should say. I'm just going to collapse that as well. If we were looking at similar expandables for the upper quarter Y balance test, has been shown to be reliable through some papers, so we can expand those papers out, and if I wanted to open it I would click on it. Let's try that. There's our PDF by Paul Gorman related to that reliability study for the upper quarter Y balance. It's a work in progress. I need to check on whether it's got any predictive validity, and I think we find that in the that we're not yet able to do that. We do have some normative data, and we do see that there is a symmetry, and that's what normal should be. So in gathering my thoughts about how all of these fit in, we can see that we might progress from a functional movement screen to a Y balance test, whether it be the upper quarter or the lower quarter. However, I also noticed that the pattern emerges that before someone does an upper quarter Y balance test, we've just said that they should do an FMS, but there's a couple more specifics. I want somebody to have passed an FMS score of 2 on the push-up, so I'm not just automatically going here if they didn't get an FMS of 2. The weak link would have already showed me what's happening. I don't need to then go and look for further weak links. That would be a manifestation of that. So the hierarchy for doing upper quarter specific tests of dynamic balance in the upper quarter is to ensure that the grip test is adequate and that they have an FMS press up of 2, and that they can also at least do 10 seconds in a prone plank and a side plank, not because I think that they're excellent exercises, but because this test requires somebody to be in some degree of one-handed position for quite an extended period of time as they are reaching. So I don't want them to try that if they haven't even achieved this yet. So once I gather the data, I would categorize what all this data means according to an algorithm that tells me how much at risk they are. And I would use a software called Move to Perform, which you may have seen me talk about. And the reason that we use that is that we have some data that tells us that it is predictive of future injury. That came out by Mike Lair last year in 2013, and that it improves the efficiency of field screening in large groups. There's a couple of flyers here as well, looks at the research summary around it, and that there has been some data being compiled, presented at the combined sections meeting last year, that looked at if you took the risk categories from the Move to Perform software that were populated as a result of doing Y balance and functional movement screen testing and some injury history, that you could then apply interventions that were produced by the Move to Perform software that actually lowered the number of people that fell into high risk categories. Anyway, that could be linked to that, and I can open that paper up, and here we are there. That's the abstract of it here. It goes onto the second page. So I've linked that, and I know that if I want to ever draw up some data related to that, I can find it. And if new data comes in there and I'll add it, or I may need to add a second bubble. Sorry, not a second, but another bubble. So you'll notice here that we've got an extra one here. So in the early stages of just doing pre-activity baseline testing, I may not go greater than body weight. You see I've got body weight testing here and screening. Perhaps at times I will do greater than body weight testing because I've got the time to do so, and at other times I wouldn't do so. If I was going to a return to sport, let's see if we can expand that down. If I was going to a return to sport protocol, I would, let's go down over here, returning to safe activity, I would use, I'll just scroll down here, greater than body weight testing. So let's just narrow that down a little. So you'll see what I've done here is I have collapsed what we've just been looking at, and I've just zoomed across to step 4, which was determining safe return to activity, and that came again from the PDF that Phil had created, which was step 4, determining safe return to activity. gross impairments normalized, body weight testing greater than body weight testing. So let's have a look. Gross impairments normalized. Body weight testing greater than body weight testing. What does that mean? Now I have pinched the same bubble, strength and flexibility asymmetries as risk factors for injury, from where I had it all the way over in the pre-activity baseline testing, that if I had done an FMS and it had pointed me to movement pattern problems and I wanted to understand whether that movement pattern problem was related to a range of motion asymmetry, a flexibility asymmetry, or a strength asymmetry or significant deficiency, I might draw on the protocols or research that had told me what I should be looking for as a risk factor for future injury. It does make me stick to an evidence-based pathway within a system. So this may look similar. Let's see if I can collapse that down. Okay. I've also added ankle closed kinetic chain dorsiflexion, and I've explained why I do that, because if I have a look at the note, I put some text in here. And these are some notes that I took from Dr. Rob Butler's podcast on the functionalmovement.com website, where he provided a summary about wiring, including the closed kinetic chain dorsiflexion. I would like to find the article by Tanya Pizzari that looks at the correlation between knee to wall and ankle range of motion, so that I could add that as a linked paper. It kind of fits into this realm of ankle range of motion as a movement pattern, but still related to flexibility. So that's why it sits underneath there. Again, you'll see that I could put that straight across here. That's where it was before. I moved it sideways so that I could select these two lines independently. And you'll see again we've got a lower quarter Y balance test when I'm returning safe to activity. If it's a lower limb injury or an upper limb injury, same deal, we're looking at grip testing, plank clearing tests. If I wanted to go greater than body weight testing, I would then look at, this is a test called the closed kinetic chain upper extremity stability test, that is a way of perhaps looking a little bit more at capacity of somebody's upper limb rather than just competency, because it's a test that looks at how quickly you could tap in a plank position with your right hand reaching across to your left hand and your left hand reaching across to your right hand as quickly as possible within 15 seconds. So it looks a bit at capacity. What it doesn't do is tell us much about the left and the right asymmetries, and that's why I'd like to see that show up in an upper quarter Y balance test. However, if I wanted to expand even further on that capacity and try and find an asymmetry, I would do a one-arm hop test, as described by Sue Falsone and some colleagues in 2002, as shown to be reliable, and I could then determine whether somebody's upper quarter specific fundamental movement patterns and capacity was at a significantly reduced risk because it wasn't asymmetrical. So now there's a description, I think, in here. There's an abstract that I've just cut and paste from the PubMed or from the original article, which I do have. So if I expanded the closed kinetic chain upper extremity stability test, we could look at the data that tells us it's reliable and predictive of future injury in certain populations. I don't have to use it all the time, but it might be relevant if I'm coming back, taking an athlete back through upper extremity rehabilitation. If we come back to this parent bubble of greater than body weight testing, we've seen the upper quarter hop testing. We could look at the lower quarter hop testing, and I would then be wanting to understand whether they have left-right asymmetries in vertical jump, horizontal lateral, horizontal forwards, and I'll just collapse that for the moment. It's looking a bit messy. And the double leg depth vertical jump, and some of these are based on competency and some of them are based on capacity. So there's a bit of a hierarchy there. I don't want to test capacity before I've tested competency, and if I'm going to say that something's competent, I want to make sure that there's some agreement amongst our peers about what competency means, and therefore there needs to be reliability, some kind of clinical experience and logic to it, and I'd like to reference those articles if necessary. So in terms of the lower quarter hop testing, after somebody has been passed as competent in a functional movement screen and Y balance tests, because these are just body weight, we're looking at greater than body weight now. A double leg depth vertical jump, there's a couple of papers that have been conflicting in their ability to predict future ACL injuries when we categorize somebody as having a valgus collapse of the knee. And so we present those two articles there. We're not sure that it is predictive. There's two articles that give us some data about that it is predictive, and another one that says that it isn't. This is a larger study and more recent. So when we don't have conclusive evidence about that, then what we're really looking for is not a great data about its risk of injury, but we don't like to see valgus collapse. We just think it's incompetent landing, so that's the best that we can make a statement about. I will do one, and I will be aware of somebody landing poorly and look at implementing that as a recommended intervention. So there's our vertical leaps. If we looked at the horizontal forwards, we've got the single leg hop tests, the triple hop, the triple crossover hop, 6 meter timed hop, the hop and stop, and 6 meter timed hop doesn't have great reliability, and we've got a paper here that tells us that that's the case. A couple of papers actually. So I'm not using the 6 meter timed hop. I am using the single, triple and triple crossover hop, and the reason that we use that is explained in a little note here, but if I wanted to expand further, it's because it's reliable and it is responsive to training in reconstructed ACLs, and the papers are listed here. And again, I can link to those within my own computer, or if I've just got the PubMed reference, that will show up as well. The hop and stop test, I've linked to a YouTube video that describes what they are and what the criteria are for the hop and stop test, and another example of why we're using them is because it does identify limb symmetry index asymmetries, and there is a paper that tells us that that is the case. If I was looking at horizontal lateral movements, I could do a lateral hop over 40 centimeters in 30 seconds, and we don't have a paper on that. Well, I don't have a paper on that, but I do use it as a fatigue ability test, and I often see people that are demonstrated to be symmetrical in these reliable tests and who are asymmetrical in a lateral hop over 40 centimeters. So it's just finding me at the pointy end of their return to activity. I wouldn't necessarily be too keen to return them to sport if they passed FMS Y balance test, hop testing, competent on a vertical jump, double leg or single leg depth vertical jump, and then found out a 15 to 20% deficit in lateral hop. And I have seen that in a couple of athletes, so it's there if I want to. So let's collapse some of these down, and we have some agility and sport-specific testing as a higher level. I'm yet to expand on that. That's just the work in progress. So I don't think we've really missed anything here. I'll just collapse that down, and I will do a little collapse of that area. When the injury does occur, we've got the SFMA process, which is not completely contained here, and I'd encourage people to do that SFMA course to understand how that all fits in with what they already have as a skill set. But we do have some data that says that the SFMA scoring criteria is reliable using two different scoring protocols, and I did make some notes here about what the principles of it are, and then I have linked my own scanned manuals from the courses that I have attended, so I can go straight to those if I need them. So these are the principles for intervention, and these are the principles for further assessment once the top tier tests have been done. So some further notes that I've made. So that's the mind map so far, and if I just show you this little link here, let's say somebody has been through the initial screening and they have a risk category. What we do to prevent them developing an injury further is to take as many modifiable risk factors off the table as possible based on their risk. And we work with the reds and oranges initially because they've been shown to be 3.5 times more likely to suffer a future injury in a couple of populations, military and also an athletic population. So we like to work with those, and we've got a link here. Let's check on that. Okay, so this is the article that tells us that athlete-specific corrective exercises do improve the injury risk categories in a collegiate softball team. So again, I've just linked to the paper that makes reference to why we do this. If I wanted to highlight specifically how I would address corrective exercises for those who've just done an FMS, I could click on this here and it would take me to this second mind map. So watch what happens when we do that now. You'll see that that changes from that highlight to this highlight, and I've created a second mind map that expands a lot more about what happens if you get pain in correctives and if you don't have any pain, that we're looking at doing mobility competency versus static dynamic stability. So hopefully it's not doing your head in, but there's so much that's going on in this world of the people that are doing research into functional movement systems, into range of motion, into strength, asymmetries and limitations, into principles that we should be aware of, into tips about how we can implement these into large groups, into assessment protocols, into reliability studies and validity studies, and lots of discussions and videos and all of those types of things. And I'm just trying to gather those together, and I used as a preliminary skeleton Phil's excellent systematic injury prevention that allows you to see where somebody might be in their process and why these are particularly chosen. They're not just plucked out of thin air. They're chosen because they're based on reliability studies, predictive validity studies, discriminant validity studies, and also a process that's tried and true across multiple organisations. There's some testimonials that are included into some of the flyers that we had in the educational material. For example, a football marketing flyer, I think we might see some testimonials that come from so John Tureen and also Joe Kessler and Tom Dimitrov. So anything that I've seen that's very relevant to this process, it has been linked in there somewhere. It is a work in progress. It will evolve. It will be added to. But what it has done is it has improved my ability to see where everything fits in, and hopefully you could get something out of it. And I'm happy to talk further about it with some specific pointed questions if you wish. Catch me on Twitter. Just look up @GregDay, GregDea.